The earliest trace of the André family dates back to the beginning of the 1400s in the Vivarais region in southern central France. Those early members of the family were notaries in Saint-Lhac and La Jontière. Our ancestor, David André, moved south to the city of Nimes in 1600, where he set himself up as a wool dyer and merchant, and like most of his peers, lent money at interest. David's three sons, David, Jean and Jacques, and his grandsons, were the driving force behind the rise of the dynasty, establishing thriving trading businesses in Geneva, in Genoa and in Nimes. The Nimes branch traded in the silk industry, and with a couple of other families, soon controlled the entire industry from the manufacture of silk to the production and export of finished products, especially stockings. The André family members were staunch supporters of John Calvin's branch of Protestantism. In France they were called Huguenots. However, the family seems to have avoided the worst aspect of the Huguenot persecution because they had already established themselves in Genoa and Geneva and could enter and leave France at will. David's son Jacques and his wife Pierrette had 11 offspring, one of whom was Jean André, born in 1651. Jean and wife Louise continued the big family tradition and parented 10 children, the eldest of whom was our direct line relative, Guillaume. Guillaume André became a banker in the flourishing city-state of Genoa at the end of the 1600s. 3 of his sons, who were born in Genoa, migrated to London. Anthony, David and John Louis were in their 20s when they arrived in London in the 1740s, and thus began the English branch of the André family. It appears likely their move to London was a financial move to establish the André family on the ground floor of the growing economy in Britain. They established themselves as merchants in the city of London, using their family connections back at home. Other descendants of David moved to Paris, where they established a thriving business empire, including banking, insurance, canal construction and property development. The Andrés in Paris were involved in the financing of the Suez Canal. Guillaume's first son, Anthony, was naturalised an Englishman by Act of Parliament. He married a Parisian, Marie-Louise Girardot, with whom he had 5 children. His son John became the most famous of our ancestors. He is the Major John André, who is buried in Westminster Abbey. None of Anthony and Marie's children married. The younger son, William, was created a baronet, becoming Sir William Louis André when he was 21, in honour of the memory of his brother John. The baronetcy became extinct on his death. The second son, David, married Jane Mary Boussière, the daughter of French immigrants like the Andrés. He was also naturalised by Act of Parliament and became a merchant located in the city. He died aged 70 and is buried in Hackney. The third son, John Louis, our line ancestor, was born in Genoa in 1730. Like his brothers, he was a merchant in the City of London and was naturalised by Act of Parliament. He married Mary Drury when he was 38 and Mary was 18. They had 2 sons, John Lewis and James Peter Sr., our line ancestor. John Louis died in 1811, aged 81, and Mary died in 1825, aged 75. Both are buried in Hackney. James Peter André Sr. was born on the 6th of July 1774, probably in Islington, just north of the centre of London. He married Mary Ann Loseley in about 1800. They had 3 children, James Peter Jr., our line ancestor, William and Mary Louisa. James Peter Sr. and wife Mary lived at 5 York Place, City Road, Islington, London. James Peter was a merchant in Camomile Street in the City of London. In 1814 he was elected as a director of the French hospital, becoming the fifth André to be elected as a director of that august Huguenot institution. James Peter died in 1850 at his home in Islington at the age of 76. His wife Mary died at the ripe old age of 87. James Peter André Jr. was born on the 1st of September 1801. At the age of 31 years, he married Sarah Field, who was 21. They had 3 children: James Lewis, our line ancestor, Sarah Catherine and Mary Emily. Sarah died in childbirth, having Mary, who survived her mother. Sarah Catherine lived for only 6 years. It seems James and his 2 children lived with his parents after his wife died. Later, he moved to a home in St Mark's Square, in the very salubrious district of Regent's Park. James' occupation was listed as merchant, as were his father and brother William. He was also elected to the Court of Directors of the French Hospital, becoming the 7th André to do so. J.P. André was the artist responsible for all the paintings handed down amongst the family. The paintings indicate that he must have travelled extensively around England. He died at age 67 at his house in St Mark's Square. He and wife Mary, along with daughter Catherine, are buried in a vault in the grounds of St John at Hackney Church. James Lewis André was born in 1833 in Islington, North London. At some stage during the years before he was married, James gave up his Huguenot Protestant heritage and became a Catholic. This must have been a very bold decision. The story handed down is that he was so enthralled with the cathedrals and churches built before the Reformation that he considered Catholicism had to be the only true faith. James married Lucy Marion Hartwell in 1862 in a Catholic church, St John the Evangelist in Islington. He was 29 and Lucy was 22. They had 8 children, including our ancestor who moved to Australia, Michael Wilfred. James studied architecture and was apprenticed to the well-known London church architect of the time, S.S. Toulon, who, like James, was of Huguenot descent. The only project we know James was involved in during his career was the restoration of St Mary's Church in Horsham, Sussex. The restoration was done under the guidance of Toulon, who entrusted James to carry out the restoration. The history of the church states that the restoration was a remarkable feat of engineering. Horsham must have appealed to James, as in 1868 the family moved from Islington to Horsham, 60 kilometres south of London. At first they rented a house from the poet Shelley's family, Arran House in Den Road. In 1875 the family moved to Sarcelles, a large imposing Victorian house at 86 Hurst Road. Given his profession, it is likely that James designed and managed the construction of the house. Both he and Lucy lived at Sarcelles for the rest of their lives. James's conversion to Catholicism did not seem to affect the inheritance from his father. James had sufficient funds to build a large house and be able to retire from his profession when he was 38 years old, to indulge himself in his passion for archaeology and local history. James died at Sarcelles at the age of 68. His wife Lucy died 6 years later. Both James and Lucy are buried in the graveyard of Our Lady of Consolation Catholic Church at West Grinstead, a few kilometres south of Horsham. Michael Wilfred André was born on the 12th of November 1872 in the then family residence, Arran Cottage, in Horsham, Sussex, England. He was always known as Wilf. He was the 6th of 8 children born to James Lewis and Lucy Marion André. Shortly after he was born, the family moved to a newly built residence, Sarcelles, in Horsham. Wilf trained as a civil engineer and was employed by a firm involved in the construction of branch railway lines in the county of Sussex. Neither of the two lines we know he was involved in are still in operation, although one, the Rother Valley Railway between Robertsbridge and Tenterden, is being restored by a group of enthusiasts. Wilf apparently suffered from respiratory problems and was sent on a sea voyage to Japan in 1902 to see whether that would improve his health. On that voyage he met Eileen Coghlan, who was on a cruise to China and Japan with her sisters following the death of their father in January that year. It must have been some romance, as Wilf travelled to Australia the following year to marry Eileen. He left London on the Ortona in October 1903 and married Eileen in St Patrick's Cathedral in Ballarat on the 8th of December. He was 31 and Eileen was 26. After the wedding, they sailed back to England to live. Their first house was York Lodge in Manor Road in Reigate, Surrey. By 1906 they were living in a house called Tiora Ora in Eastergate, just south of Chichester. Wilf and Eileen's first two children, Mary and Jim, were born in England at Tiora Ora. Records show that the Andres owned a Buston Humber car, which was serviced by Jackson Brothers in Horsham. As Wilf's medical condition had not improved, they decided to move to Australia to live in the warmer and drier climes of Ballarat. The family, along with a nurse, boarded the Ortona on the 15th of October 1909 and arrived in Melbourne in November. After several moves, the Andres bought a house in Wanless Street from Eileen's sister Trix. It was called Glendara. Both Wilf and Eileen lived there for the rest of their lives. Glendara was a rambling Federation Edwardian-style house on a large block of land with a lawn tennis court and a very large vegetable garden. They also purchased a house in Otway Court in Portland as a holiday house. Wilf and Eileen had 7 children. Besides Mary and Jim, who were born in England in 1907 and 1909, Dorothy was born in 1910, Bob in 1912, Rosalie in 1915, Ted in 1917, and John in 1919. There was a 12-year gap between their first and last children. Wilf did not pursue his occupation as an engineer in Australia. When his father died in 1901, Wilf inherited a solid portfolio of shares. He was hit hard by the worldwide depression in the 1930s, and it pained him deeply to have to sell long-standing family holdings. Eileen's Ballarat Brewing Co. dividends, however, were maintained throughout the Depression. Wilf was a keen supporter of the Ballarat Club in Dana Street, which he would attend every day and sometimes twice a day. He was a heavy smoker, and one of the rooms at Glendara was known as the smoking room. Wilf was part of a generation which had no interest in the domestic arrangements of the household. He probably never ever went near the kitchen and may not have even known where it was in the house. Ever the quintessential Englishman, Wilf would stand for God Save the Queen, even when it was played on the radio, and would always put money on the English cricket team when it played Australia. Wilf died in 1950 at 77 years of age of myocardial failure. Eileen died 6 years later of heart failure at the age of 79. They are both buried in the Ballarat New Cemetery.